welcome to the Car Cult. On this episode of the History of Cars, we explore the extraordinary lives of a group of wealthy British motorists that have become known as the Bentley Boys. They were the Brat Pack before the Rat Pack. This group made Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Junior, and the rest of the Rat Pack look like a convent of nuns. Before we dive into this video, first a message on this series and the Car Cult channel. On the Car Cult channel, we are hoping to bring regular shows to you, our viewers, on all that is happening in the car world, whether it is new car announcements, car culture, or car-related entertainment in video games, or at the movies. This is your one place for everything to do with cars. In the History of Cars series, we will be exploring the nearly 200 years of the motor car. We will be diving into how the invention of the motor car changed the course of history and how it left an indelible mark on human civilization. So buckle up for some of the most fascinating stories that the motor world and history has to offer. Chapter 1. The Original Bentley Boy. Before the term Bentley Boys gained notoriety, there was one Walter Owen Bentley who would found a sports car manufacturer in his name in 1919. Born in 1888, W.O. Bentley would have a passion for motion from an early age. He would leave school at 16 and start an apprenticeship with the Great Northern Railway and live out his dream of hurling coal into the firebox of the train. His passion would soon transition to the road when he bought himself a quadrant motorcycle and would plunge into the world of racing. He would practice on his motorcycle in the early hours of the morning, so that he would avoid the police speed traps. His first success would come in 1907 when he would take part in the London Edinburgh trial. He broke down outside Edinburgh, but would manage to repair the bike and still finish with a time that would take the gold medal. He would go on to win further golds in the London, Plymouth and London Land's End trials a year later. As his experience in racing grew, his knowledge of enhancing engine performance would become legendary. He would go into business with his brothers in 1912, when he would start importing French cars made by Doriot, Flandin, and Parent. Whilst on a visit to their offices in France, he would pick up a paperweight made of aluminium and would be possessed with the thought of the possibilities of this lightweight material being used to make a better piston than steel or cast iron. He would begin experimenting with aluminium in order to add strength to the metal and stop it from melting at the high temperatures it would be exposed to within an engine. He would create a new alloy at the foundry when he finally settled on a formula of 88% aluminium and 12% copper. By adding these new pistons to the DFP cars, he would take victory at Brooklands and set a new record of 89.7 miles per hour for a flying mile. When the First World War broke out, W.O. Bentley would put his ambitions of starting his own car company on hold and would instead join the Royal Naval Air Service as a captain, where he used his aluminium pistons to create an engine for fighter aircraft that would be more powerful and reliable than previous versions. The first Bentley rotary engine, the BR-1, made the Sopwith Camel the most successful British aircraft of the war. Following the conclusion of the war, W.O. would be awarded £8,000 from the Commission of Awards to Inventors, and he would use these funds to start his own car company. So on July 10, 1919, the Bentley Motors Company was born, with a philosophy of make a fast car, a good car, the best in its class, something that will be core to the company's philosophy for the next century. Chapter 2. The Bentley Boys arrive. In the 1920s and 30s, the Bentley Motor Company's racing credentials would reach a new pinnacle thanks to a group of wealthy men who would become known as the Bentley Boys. This group of extraordinary playboys, racers, and adventurers would achieve worldwide notoriety. They would inspire a whole generation of racers with their passion for driving and deep love of a challenge. W.O. himself would describe the influence of the Bentley Boys on the Bentley Motor Company as, "I don't think many companies can have built up during such a short period, a comparable font of legend and myth, story and anecdote. The company's activities attracted the public's fancy and added a touch of color, of vicarious glamour and excitement to drab lives. The Bentley Boys would include the former fighter pilot, Sir Tim Birkin, Harley Street specialist J.D. Benjy Benjafield, racing journalist Sammy Davis, born adventurer Glen Kidston, and would be led by Woolf Barnato. They would take life to the extreme, hit headlines for their exploits off the racetrack as much as their extraordinary performances on it. On today's episode, we will cover some of the crazier and more prominent Bentley Boys, but not everyone, as we could spend hours on their wild exploits. Maybe one for a future episode. Chapter 3. Woolf Barnato. The leader of the group, Woolf Barnato, was a British financier and racing driver. Born in 1895 in London, he was the youngest son of Barney Barnato and Fanny Bees. The family fortune would be made as a landlord in South African diamond and gold mining. When Woolf was 2 years old, his father would die during a sea crossing from South Africa to London. The official report would state it was suicide as a result of death by drowning while temporarily insane. Woolf went on to inherit his father's fortune. Woolf would receive a further inheritance when Woolf Barnato Joel, his relative from the Joel family and another South African mining magnate, was murdered in 1898. Woolf was educated at Trinity College in Cambridge. But it wasn't academia that was his passion. Instead, he would seek the thrill of various sports at a young age. He immersed himself in the sport, practiced endlessly, and took lessons from the very best tutors. This desire to excel would see him collect prizes for motorboat racing by using a Bentley-powered boat called Ardenrun 5, which was named after his house, where he bred horses. Woolf became a strong swimmer, had a good amateur boxing career, and also played tennis to a semi-professional standard. During World War I, he served as an officer in the Royal Field Artillery Division of the British Army, with overseas campaigns in France, Egypt, and Palestine, and attained the rank of captain during the latter stages of the war. During the course of the war, he broke off his business ties with the Joel's family, resulting in a long legal dispute in South Africa. Following the settlement of the case, he went on to play first-class cricket for Surrey County Cricket Club as a wicket-keeper between 1928 and 1930. A few years before his budding cricket career, Woolf purchased his first Bentley, a 3-liter, which he would win numerous Brooklands races in. Only 12 months later, he purchased the Bentley Motor Company itself. The Bentley business had been underfunded for a long time, and yet through the exploits of the likes of John Duff and Frank Clement, would win the Le Mans 24 Hours race in 1924. Woolf invested an initial amount of £100,000, which saved the business and its workforce from being laid off. The business was reorganized, creditors were paid off, and Woolf became controlling shareholder of the company and its new chairman. Woolf then injected further funds into the company in 1927 and again in 1928 and 1929. With this financial backing, WO was able to design and build a new generation of cars that elevated the brand to new heights. The first of these cars was the 6-cylinder, 6.5-liter that was to morph into the epic Bentley Speed 6. Woolf would push WO to produce the 4.5-liter that became the famous blower Bentley. The racing version of the blower went on to win the 24 Hours race in 1928, when Woolf teamed up with New Zealander and fellow Bentley boy Bernard Rubin. Woolf won the 24-hour race again in 1929 and 1930, when he raced in the Bentley Speed 6, which would be given the affectionate name of Old Number 1. On these successful wins, he teamed up with Sir Henry Tim Birkin and Glen Kidston, respectively. These were the only years that Woolf would enter the Le Mans race, which earned him a perfect win ratio, and WO himself would say of Woolf that he was the best driver we ever had, and I consider the best British driver of his day, one who never made a mistake and always obeyed orders. Following his exploits in Le Mans, Woolf would enter the blue train races. In March 1930, while sitting at a dinner party on a yacht in Cannes, the talk amongst the group would turn to motor cars and the recent marketing from Rover that their Light 6 car could go faster than the famous Lou Train Blue Express, which was a luxury night train that carried passengers between Calais and the French Riviera. The Blue Train, which got its name from the dark blue sleeping cars, was beaten for the first time by a motor vehicle in January 1930, when the Rover Light 6 achieved the 750-mile journey in around 20 minutes less than the over 20 hours it took the train to complete the journey. The achievement turned the Rover team into celebrities. One of those at the dinner was Woolf, who described the Rover achievement as no great shakes and raised the stakes when he argued that in his Bentley Speed 6, he would not only beat the train from the French Riviera to Calais, but that he would be back at his club in London before the train had even reached Calais. He placed a £200 wager on his success. The very next day, on March 13, 1930, as the Blue Train steamed out of Calais station at 5:30 p.m., Woolf and his co-driver, an amateur golfer, Dale Bourne, finished their drinks and then drove the Speed 6 out of the Carlton bar. They battled through heavy rain and would even lose time when they began searching for a refueling point in Auxerre. As they progressed through central France, they hit thick fog, and then when approaching Paris, one of the tires burst. They reached the dock at Boulogne at 10:30 a.m. and sailed to England. They crossed the south of England and arrived at the Conservative Club in St. James Street in London at 3:20 p.m., some 4 minutes before the Blue Train reached Calais. Woolf won the bet, but the French authorities fined Bentley Motors £160 for racing on public roads and barred Bentley from the Paris Salon of 1930. This race would inspire another generation, when Top Gear regularly featured Jeremy Clarkson taking on James May and Richard Hammond in car versus public transport races. Following the Wall Street crash in 1929, demand for luxury Bentley cars was badly affected and 2 mortgage payments on the company falling due in 1931. Woolf accepted the inevitable, and following a period in receivership, Bentley was acquired by Rolls-Royce. Woolf received £42,000 in return for his share of the business and was again on the board of Bentley Motors in 1934. Woolf's spending on racing success was only matched by his spending on lavish properties, including his house in London, where he lived whilst married to Dorothy Maitland, and then, after his divorce, he moved to a flat at 50 Grosvenor Square in Mayfair, London. A number of the other Bentley boys would have flats of their own in the same block, and with the amount of Bentleys parked there, the local taxi drivers would dub it Bentley's Corner. He also owned a country house in Surrey, named Arden Run Place, which was where Woolf threw lavish champagne-fueled motor racing parties with his friends until it was destroyed in a fire in 1933. He then built his own large house, which cost £100,000 all the way back in 1938. The house featured revolutionary central heating, a talkie cinema, and a drive lit by secret light rays. The house had 25 bedrooms, a heated swimming pool, and was set in 25 acres overlooking the River Thames. During this third and final marriage, he even bought his own island, an 8-acre plot named Parrots Island in Bermuda. In recognition of his sporting accomplishments, the Sports Car Club of America would name its most prestigious award after Woolf, with the first Woolf Barnato Award presented in 1948 after his death in the same year. Chapter 4. Dudley Benjy Benjafield. Before Woolf won his 3 successive titles, there was another of the Bentley boys who would win Le Mans the year before, in 1927. Dudley Benjafield, who was given the nickname Benjy by his friends, was a British medical doctor and racing driver. He was born in London in 1887 and would receive his medical doctorate at University College Hospital, where he specialized in bacteriology and used his expertise when he served in Egypt during World War I and later in combating the Great Flu epidemic of 1918. He developed a passion for motorsports, first in boating and then motor vehicles. Following the destruction of his motorboat, he would purchase a Bentley 3-liter and started racing in 1924. His early success led him to being offered a company racer at the request of WO. He was regarded as the most modest, thoughtful, and deceptively skillful member of the Bentley Boys. And whilst he may not have been the fastest, the fact that he had the discipline to follow team orders led him to win the Le Mans race in 1927, with his fellow Bentley Boys co-driver, Sammy Davis, despite the car being badly damaged and the team having to make on-the-spot repairs, including strapping torches to replace the smashed headlights. This allowed Benjy and Sammy Davis to race through the night. At the Savoy celebration dinner, the toast to someone who should be present was proposed as the battle-scarred Bentley, known as Old Number 7, was wheeled into the dining room as the guest of honor. This would be a tradition that Bentley revived nearly 80 years later, when the Bentley Speed 8 was the guest of honor at the Le Mans Victory Dinner. Benjy competed in Le Mans a total of 7 times, but whilst he managed to achieve a third-place finish, he would not manage to take the win again. He, however, left a lasting legacy when he founded the British Racing Drivers Club in 1936. The club continues to operate today and is the owner of the Formula One racetrack, Silverstone, host of the British Grand Prix, Chapter 5, Sir Henry Tim Birkin. Born in 1896, he gained the nickname of Tim after the childhood comic book character Tiger Tim, an extremely popular book at the time. During his military career, he contracted malaria, a disease that stayed with him for the rest of his life. Shortly after the war, in 1921, Birkin took up motor racing and competed in a few Brooklands races. He was forced to retire from racing due to business and family pressures. But then in 1927, he was back in a 6-hour race when he entered in a 3-liter Bentley. The return to motor racing would be against his family wishes, but there was no stopping him as he acquired a 4.5-liter Bentley a year later and became a familiar sight on the racetrack with his blue and white spotted silk scarf around his neck. He persuaded the wealthy heiress, Dorothy Paget, to finance a team of supercharged 4.5-liter Bentleys that became known as the Blowers. In 1928, Birkin entered Le Mans and led the race for 20 laps until a jammed wheel forced him to drop back, resulting in a 5th-place finish. A year later, he went on to win the Le Mans race when he teamed up with Woolf. They won the race in the mighty Speed 6, which was a huge car and was famously dubbed by Ettore Bugatti as the world's fastest lorry. Birkin was regarded as the epitome of the vintage racing age through his courageous and fearless driving style. Following the withdrawal of Bentley from racing and its subsequent takeover by Rolls-Royce, Birkin won Le Mans again, but this time in an Alfa Romeo, and he received a telegram from Benito Mussolini congratulating on his win for Italy. On May 7, 1933, Birkin started the Tripoli Grand Prix in a new 3-liter Maserati 8C and finished 3rd. During a pit stop, his arm was badly burnt by a hot exhaust pipe whilst picking up a cigarette lighter. There is some suggestion that the wound turned septic, but others have said he suffered a malaria attack. It was probably a combination of both elements that proved fatal when he died at the young age of 36. Bentley honored Birkin with the limited edition Birkin on Age in 2000, Chapter 6. Glen Kidston. Another member of the Bentley Boys who would die too young was Glen Kidston, who, in the 32 years of his life, achieved more than most of us can achieve in a lifetime. Born at the end of the 19th century, Glen was an English motor racing driver and an aviator. He was very much a fast-living type of guy, who was one of the Bentley Boys to be based at Grosvenor Square, and his day-long parties would become legendary. Glen, as with many of his contemporaries, joined the war effort and became a lieutenant commander in the Royal Navy during World War I. He survived being torpedoed twice in the same morning when HMS Aboukir and the Hogue were hit by German U-boats. All this when he was only 15 years of age. His adventures during the war did not end there, and he would go on to serve on the HMS Orion during the Battle of Jutland, running the open decks whilst under direct enemy fire. Having been on the receiving end of submarine torpedoes, he decided that it would be better to be the one dispatching the torpedoes instead. He served on the leading-edge British submarine, the X-1, which he would serve on during its sea trials. The boat got stuck in the mud of the seabed and would surface hours after everyone was believed to be dead. His near misses with death would not end there. In 1929, he was aboard a Junkers tri-motor aircraft. When it would crash, Glen survived by kicking his way out of the burning fuselage, with his clothes alight, only to be saved by rolling in the wet grass. All other 5 people on board died in the crash. Only a year later, Glen won the Le Mans race with his fellow driver, Woolf Barnato, when driving in the Bentley Speed 6. Following his Le Mans victory in 1930, Glen turned to aviation and would go on to set the record for the flight from England to South Africa in the following year. He, however, did not make the return trip after he was killed when he borrowed a de Havilland Puss moth. The plane broke up in mid-air when flying through a dust storm over the Drakensberg Mountains. When news of his death was announced in London, 2 of Glen's lovers, Margaret Wickham and Barbara Cartlan, would claim that they fainted upon seeing the headlines in the London papers. At the age of 32, Glen Kidston would leave behind a legacy of being the epitome of the Bentley Boys movement. He lived life to its fullest and did not regret a minute of it. If you would like more videos on the very first cars and the origins of the motor vehicle, please like, subscribe, and comment on what you would like to see. We appreciate all your help to grow this channel and the community. Until next time on The Car Cult.